The average American household spends nearly twice what the average Japanese household spends on groceries every month, and no one has ever told you why. Japanese families for generations have been using a set of frugal habits around shopping, storing, and cooking that can slash your grocery bills in half. And today I'm going to show you 17 of them that my grandma showed me when I was young, including a fridge organization trick and a healthy 40-cent breakfast that leaves you fuller than any bowl of that expensive cereal. These are habits you can start using this week, and by the end of the month, you will see the difference on your bills. The first habit is going to change how you think about your fridge forever. In most American homes, a full fridge is treated as a sign of a well-stocked household, packed floor to ceiling with jars in front of jars and packages piled on top of packages. And the general belief is that a fridge with empty space in it must mean the family is running low on food. Japanese households deliberately keep the fridge no more than 70% full, and there is a specific phrase for it, Rizoko wa nanabumi, which translates roughly as the fridge at 7/10. The empty space is deliberate, because cold air has to circulate for the fridge to work properly, but the real payoff is visibility. A jar of salsa hiding behind 2 other jars is a jar you will buy again on your next trip to the store, and a bag of spinach wedged behind the milk is a bag of spinach that will turn into slime before you remember it exists. On top of the 70% rule, Japanese kitchens run a system called tate shuno, which is vertical storage in clear rectangular containers with the labels facing out, so every single item is visible from above the moment you open the door. Nothing gets stacked, nothing hides behind anything else, and the bottom of the fridge never becomes archaeology. The average American throws away roughly $1,500 worth of food a year, and most of it dies at the back of a fridge no one can see into. A fridge you can actually see is a fridge where almost nothing ever goes to waste. And once you can see everything in your fridge at a single glance, last night's leftover rice becomes tomorrow's lunch instead of next week's trash. The average Japanese salaryman does not walk into a sandwich shop at noon and hand over $12 for a lunch he could have made at home for pocket change, because the Japanese salaryman is carrying an onigiri that his wife or he himself made in about 30 seconds the night before. Onigiri is the humble Japanese rice ball, a triangle of cold rice with a small salty center of pickled plum, salted salmon flake, or a spoon of tuna and mayonnaise, wrapped in a strip of dried nori seaweed. The total ingredient cost per rice ball is about 30 cents, and 2 of them make a full lunch. A working American who spends $12 a day on lunch across a 5-day work week is losing about $3,000 a year to a habit that Japan solved with leftover rice, a pinch of salt, and half a minute of assembly. The onigiri travels perfectly in a lunch bag or even in a coat pocket. It needs no reheating, and it stays palatable for the entire morning. Once your household defaults to onigiri instead of the deli sandwich, the money that was bleeding out into paid lunches 5 days a week comes right back into the grocery budget, and the leftover rice from dinner has a job the next day rather than sitting in the fridge waiting to be forgotten. And once you accept that a simple bowl of rice can be a full meal on its own, the cheapest breakfast in the entire Japanese kitchen is waiting for you tomorrow morning. The Japanese equivalent of an American breakfast is called tamago kk gohan, and it costs roughly 40 cents to put on the table. You crack a raw egg into a bowl of hot, fresh rice, add a small splash of soy sauce, whisk the whole thing together with your chopsticks until the yolk turns glossy and coats every grain, and you eat it immediately while the heat of the rice is still gently cooking the egg. It is the most common weekday breakfast in Japan, and children grow up eating it before school the way American kids grow up eating cereal from a colored box. Compare it to the standard American breakfast options: a bowl of packaged cereal with milk running about $2, an egg sandwich from a coffee shop running $6 or more, or a couple of pastries from the corner bakery running $4 or $5. A family of 4 switching their morning meal over to tamago kake gohan even 3 days a week is saving somewhere between $30 and $50 every week, which works out to more than $1,500 a year on breakfast alone. The nutrition is genuinely superior to sugary cereal. The preparation takes under a minute once the rice is cooked, and the flavor is savory, rich, and satisfying in a way that a bowl of dry flakes with cold milk has never managed. And if you want to know how my family cut hundreds of dollars from our grocery bill every month, and how we keep our pantry organized so that no food ever goes to waste, the same way my grandma has been doing it for years, I have pulled all of it together into my book called The Complete Japanese Kitchen Handbook. You can find the book over at frugaljapan.shop by scanning the QR code on the screen or by clicking the link in the description below for instant access. Now, back to the list. The reason a simple bowl of rice and egg can anchor a whole family's morning is that the same pot of rice fuels lunch and dinner too. And the entire structure of Japanese eating starts to make sense once you understand the one rule that governs every meal on the table. The rule is called Ikiju Sansai, which translates as one soup, 3 sides, and it describes the classic template every traditional Japanese meal is built on. The full meal is a bowl of rice, a bowl of soup, which is usually miso, and 3 small side dishes. And the important part is that no single component on the table is ever the expensive centerpiece. In a standard American dinner, one large protein sits at the middle of the plate. A big steak, a chicken breast, a piece of salmon, and everything else exists to accompany it, which means the cost of the meal is driven almost entirely by that one dominant ingredient. Ikiju Sansai reshapes the entire arrangement, because when the meal is 5 small components instead of one big one, each individual component is small, and each individual component is cheap. A little pickled cucumber, a small dish of sautéed greens, a spoon of simmered beans, a bowl of miso soup, and a bowl of rice adds up to a full, satisfying dinner that costs a fraction of a slab of beef with 2 sides. The Japanese family that eats this way 3 or 4 nights a week is spending dramatically less on protein than an American family. And nobody at the table ever feels shortchanged because the meal is full of variety, texture, and flavor rather than being defined by one giant piece of meat. And when you need to stretch the rice underneath those small dishes even further, there is a Japanese preparation that turns a single cup of it into a meal for 4. Okayu is the Japanese word for rice porridge, and it is what a Japanese family cooks when the wallet is thin at the end of the pay cycle, or when someone is sick, or when the pantry is running low 3 days before the next grocery trip. You take 1 cup of dry rice and cook it slowly in 5 to 7 cups of water until the grains break down completely and turn into a soft, savory porridge. That single cup of rice, which would normally feed 1 or 2 people as a bowl of steamed rice, becomes 4 generous bowls of okayu, and each bowl is warm, filling, and easy to top with almost anything you have on hand. A pickled plum dropped into the middle, a soft poached egg on top, a spoon of miso stirred through, a scatter of chopped green onion, or a few flakes of leftover fish. The dish costs pennies per serving, it takes almost no effort to cook, and it is culturally respected in Japan as a proper meal in its own right. American cooking has almost no equivalent to okayu, which is why an American family in a lean week reaches for the same expensive ingredients they always use, cooked in smaller portions, and everyone goes to bed still hungry. Okayu solves the problem in the other direction by making the cheapest possible starch stretch further than it has any right to, and it does it in a way that fills the stomach properly rather than leaving anyone feeling shorted. And okayu is only one of several Japanese tricks for making sure yesterday's rice never gets thrown away. When a small amount of cold rice is sitting in the fridge from the night before, an American will usually look at it, decide it is not worth reheating for one person, and toss it in the trash on the way to ordering something. In a Japanese kitchen, that same handful of rice becomes a bowl of ochazuke in about 90 seconds. You put the cold rice in a bowl, drop in whatever small savory topping you have on hand, a broken piece of grilled salmon, a pickled plum, a spoon of furikake seasoning, a strip of nori, and then you pour hot green tea directly over the top. The rice softens instantly, the tea becomes a light savory broth infused by the toppings, and what was going to be waste becomes a warm, satisfying meal in the time it takes to boil a kettle. Ochazuke is a classic late-night dish in Japan, the kind of thing a salaryman eats when he gets home too late to cook anything real, and there are restaurants in Tokyo that specialize in nothing else. Every bowl of ochazuke in your kitchen is one meal you did not have to buy or cook from scratch, and every scrap of leftover rice that would have gone in the trash instead becomes dinner. And while Ochazuke rescues the last of the rice, another Japanese habit rescues everything else in your fridge that is one day away from being thrown out. Nebe is the Japanese word for a communal one-pot dinner where a simple broth of dashi and a splash of soy sauce simmers at the center of the table, and everyone at the table drops ingredients into the pot and pulls them out when they are cooked. The whole system was practically designed to clear out a fridge. Cabbage stumps that are starting to look tired, the last 3 mushrooms in the container, half an onion, a couple of carrots, a block of tofu that needs using whatever protein is closest to its sell-by date, all of it goes into the pot. Nabe cooks on a single burner on low heat, which means the energy bill for making dinner drops significantly compared to running the oven for an hour. It generates almost no cleanup because there are no pans and no plates for the main course, just the one pot at the center of the table and everyone's individual bowl. It stretches a very small amount of protein across a whole family because the vegetables and the tofu carry most of the volume of the meal. In Japan, a nebe night is a weekly ritual for good reason, because it converts the sad end of the crisper drawer into a dinner that everyone actually looks forward to sitting down for. Once you build a nebe night into your rotation, the vegetables you used to lose every week to spoilage instead become the highlight of Tuesday dinner. And nebe is only one version of Japan's long love affair with cheap, one-bowl dinners. And the next one takes even less effort. Kake udon is the humblest dish on the menu in almost any Japanese noodle shop. A bowl of thick, chewy wheat noodles sitting in a hot dashi broth with a scatter of chopped green onion on top. It sells for a few hundred yen in a cafe, and it costs about 60 cents to make at home. When an American does not feel like cooking, the reflex is to reach for a box of macaroni and cheese, a frozen pizza, or a $15 takeout order. The Japanese reflex is a bowl of kake udon, which takes about 8 minutes from start to finish, uses 2 pantry items and 1 green onion, and delivers a genuinely satisfying dinner. Dried udon noodles keep for months in the cupboard and cost almost nothing per serving. Dashi powder costs a few dollars for a jar that lasts you the entire year, and a green onion is essentially free. Building even one KK udon night into your weekly rotation replaces at least one $15 takeout order, which works out to more than $700 a year saved on nights you did not want to cook. There is no cultural shame in eating a bowl of plain noodles in Japan, because it is understood as a legitimate meal in its own right, ordered by businessmen and students and families without any sense of it being a lesser choice. And when even a bowl of udon feels like too much work, the Japanese pantry has an even cheaper protein source waiting for you inside a can. Tinned fish culture in Japan is called kanzume, and a can of saba, which is mackerel, or iwashi, which is sardines, is treated as a completely legitimate main course. A can costs somewhere between $1.50 and $3. It contains more than 20 grams of high-quality protein. It delivers a full day's worth of omega-3 fatty acids, and it needs nothing more to become dinner than a bowl of rice and a small dish of pickled ginger next to it. In an American pantry, tinned fish sits in the category of things you eat when everything else has gone wrong. But in a Japanese pantry, a can of mackerel simmered in a light soy and ginger sauce over hot rice is what a working couple eats on a Tuesday night and considers dinner properly served. The price per serving is a fraction of what you would spend on any fresh protein. The nutrition profile is actually superior to most cuts of beef or pork, and the preparation takes about 4 minutes. A family that swaps 2 of their weekly dinners for tinned fish meals can cut their protein spending in half without anyone at the table registering the change, because the flavor is rich and satisfying rather than compromised. And whatever cheap protein ends up on your plate, what turns a plain bowl of rice into a proper meal is a small jar of seasoning built from scraps most American kitchens throw straight into the trash. Furikake is the dry seasoning that Japanese families sprinkle over hot rice to turn a plain bowl into a complete meal, and the classic homemade version is made from things Western kitchens routinely discard. The bones and skin left over from a piece of grilled fish, the stems from bunches of dried nori that have gone stale, sesame seeds from the back of the cupboard, a small handful of dried bonito flakes, and a pinch of salt. You toast the fish bones and skin in a dry pan until they turn crispy and brittle. You grind them together with the other ingredients in a small mortar or a spice grinder, and you store the finished powder in a jar in the cupboard. A jar that lasts a full month costs pennies to make because every ingredient in it was either about to be thrown out or was already sitting in your pantry. Sprinkled over a bowl of hot rice, furikake turns the rice itself into the meal, which means you never need to make something to go with the rice again. The single habit of turning fish scraps into furikake instead of throwing them away can produce weeks of free dinners built around nothing more than a bowl of rice and a jar of seasoning. That same scrap into meal instinct shows up again whenever a Japanese cook is staring at a pot of thin broth with no plan for it. When the last of a soup is looking thin, or when the dashi in the pot has been stretched a little too far to be a real meal, a Japanese cook reaches for one egg and drizzles it slowly into the simmering broth while stirring gently with chopsticks. The egg sets in delicate golden ribbons as it hits the hot liquid, and the whole soup transforms from a thin flavored broth into a filling, satisfying meal called kakitama jiru. One egg, which costs about 25 cents, converts a cup of leftover broth into a genuine dinner. An American kitchen dealing with the same thin soup either throws it out or reaches for expensive cream to thicken it, but Japan solved the problem long ago with the cheapest protein in the entire supermarket. Once you understand the trick, no broth in your kitchen ever gets discarded again, because the moment it starts to look too thin to be dinner, an egg turns it back into dinner. Kakitama jiru is served in high-end restaurants in Japan, treated as a delicate, elegant dish rather than a way to stretch leftover broth. But the technique at a fine restaurant is exactly the same technique that gets used at home to rescue the last of the soup pot. The trick of rescuing what would have been thrown out doesn't stop at the stove. It reshapes what a Japanese household drinks all day too. Mugicha is Japanese roasted barley tea. A cold brewed pitcher of it lives in the fridge door of nearly every Japanese household throughout the summer, and it is what children drink after school instead of soda, juice, or a sports drink. A bag of roasted barley costs about $4 at any Asian grocery store, and that single bag makes gallons of tea across a whole season. You drop a tea sachet into a large pitcher, fill it with cold water, leave it in the fridge overnight, and the next morning you have a pitcher of naturally caffeine-free, deeply satisfying, slightly nutty brown tea that costs pennies per glass. Beverages are one of the most invisible categories in an American grocery budget, and a family can easily spend $50 or $60 a week on sodas, juices, coffee pods, sparkling waters, and bottled drinks without ever noticing how much of the total bill they represent. Switching household drink consumption over to a rotating pitcher of mugicha in the fridge and a kettle of hot green tea on the stove strips somewhere between $40 and $60 a week off the grocery total, which works out to more than $2,000 a year that stays in your bank account instead of being drunk. That habit of squeezing every ounce of value out of what you already own extends to the appliance most Americans use for exactly one job. The rice cooker in an American kitchen usually makes rice, and that is the entire scope of its job. But a rice cooker in a Japanese kitchen is essentially a whole second stove. While the rice cooks on the bottom, a piece of fish wrapped loosely in foil sits on top of the rice and steams gently in the moisture rising off it. 2 whole eggs jammed into the corners hard boil in the same steam, and a small container of vegetables on the very top steams alongside everything else. One flick of a switch produces the rice, the protein, and 2 side components at the same time, using a fraction of the electricity that running the oven for an hour would burn. The rice cooker holds a steady low temperature for hours after the rice is done, so you can leave the whole assembly on warm until dinner is ready to be served, and everything stays hot without turning tough or drying out. Americans spend $200 on multi-function pressure cookers to accomplish something that a basic rice cooker was already doing decades ago in every Japanese home. The electricity bill for a single rice cooker running for an hour is a small fraction of the electricity bill for a full oven running for the same amount of time, and the meal that comes out is a complete one. And once one appliance is doing the work of 3, the next Japanese trick is about 1 ingredient doing the work of 2. Stretching your most expensive purchase in a way most American kitchens have never considered. In a dish like mabo tofu, which is a Chinese origin dish that Japan adopted and made its own, tofu functions as a meat extender that stretches a very small amount of protein across a whole family. A 1/4 pound of ground pork, which costs about $2, gets cooked with aromatics, a spoon of miso, and a splash of soy sauce, and then a whole block of firm tofu, which also costs about $2, gets cut into cubes and folded into the pan. The tofu absorbs the seasoning and the meat juices completely, taking on the character and flavor of the pork itself, and the finished dish feeds 4 people generously the way a full pound of ground pork on its own would. American cooking tends to treat tofu as something for people who cannot or will not eat meat, which misses the actual point, because tofu is one of the most efficient ways to make meat go further without anyone at the table noticing what happened. A household that swaps in tofu as an extender in 2 dinners a week immediately cuts its meat spending by a third, and the meals themselves stay just as satisfying because the flavor is carried by the seasoning and the small amount of meat, rather than by the sheer quantity of pork on the plate. And the habit of stretching one meal is nothing compared to what Japan does with a single pot of curry across 3 consecutive nights. Japanese curry is called kare rasu, and it is deliberately cooked in a huge pot with the explicit intention of being eaten across 2 or 3 nights in a row, because the flavor genuinely deepens each night as it sits in the fridge. Day 1, the curry gets served over a bowl of rice as the classic kare rasu. Day 2, it gets thinned with a little dashi and poured over a bowl of udon noodles to become curry udon, and day 3, whatever is left gets stuffed inside a soft bread roll to become karapan. One session of cooking produces 3 completely different feeling dinners across the week, and there is 1 dishwash instead of 3. In an American kitchen, leftovers carry a subtle sense of failure or laziness, so people either force themselves to eat the same meal 3 nights in a row, or they throw it out and cook something new. Japan built the entire culture around curry on the principle that the same pot changes character every day and improves as it goes, which means no one at the table ever feels like they are eating yesterday's meal. Cooking a giant pot of curry on a Sunday night gives a working family 3 easy weeknight dinners for the total cost of 1. And the electricity savings from not cooking 3 separate meals adds up on top of the ingredient savings. And the same principle of stretching one ingredient across many meals shows up in the workhorse vegetable that anchors half of Japanese home cooking. Cabbage is one of the cheapest vegetables in any American supermarket, usually sitting somewhere between $1.50 and $3 for a whole head, and Japanese cooking treats it as a hero ingredient rather than a filler. A bed of finely shredded raw cabbage sits under every plate of tonkatsu in every Japanese restaurant. Thin ribbons of cabbage make up almost the entire bulk of okonomiyaki, which is the savory pancake of southern Japan. Cabbage is the first ingredient into every pot of nabe, and it appears in miso soup, in stir-fries, in pickles, and in about a dozen other applications across a typical Japanese week. A single $2 cabbage stretches across 4 separate meals in a Japanese kitchen, delivering serious volume and satisfying crunch to every one of them. The average American kitchen buys expensive plastic bags of pre-washed lettuce and mixed baby greens and throws away roughly half of every bag before it gets eaten, which is one of the most expensive habits in the entire produce aisle. Switching your household's default green vegetable from bagged lettuce to a whole head of cabbage bought once a week can strip $15 or $20 off the produce total every single trip, and cabbage keeps in the fridge for weeks without turning slimy or bitter the way delicate greens do. And the way Japan gets a full week's worth of meals from a single cabbage is a small version of a much bigger habit around buying the central staple in bulk. The final habit is one that Japanese households consider so obvious that it barely gets discussed, which is buying rice in large sacks rather than in small supermarket bags. A Japanese family will order a 10 or 20 pound sack of rice from a specialist rice retailer or from an online supplier and keep it in an airtight container called a kambitsu in a cool corner of the kitchen. The per serving cost of rice bought this way drops to somewhere around 15 cents, compared to nearly $1 per serving for the small bags of quick rice or the microwave pouches that most American shoppers reach for. When your central staple costs almost nothing per meal, every single dinner you build on top of it starts from a cheaper baseline, and the savings compound across every meal of the year. A family that eats rice with dinner 5 nights a week is looking at hundreds of dollars in savings just from the switch from small bags to a bulk sack. Rice stored properly in an airtight bin lasts for months without losing quality, so the concern that a large sack will go bad before you finish it is not a real one. Once the pantry has a full sack of good rice waiting for you, every other habit in this video, from onigiri to okayu to ochazuke to kakatamajiru, becomes easier and cheaper to execute because the base ingredient is always there, and it always costs almost nothing to build a meal around. Those are the 17 Japanese poor man's habits that can slash your grocery bill in half, starting with a fridge you can actually see into tonight and ending with a bulk sack of rice that changes the math on every meal for the rest of the year. You do not need to adopt all 17 at once, and honestly, you should not even try. Pick 3 of them this week, run them for a full month, and watch what happens at the checkout on your next few grocery trips. By the time you are ready to layer in 3 more, the first 3 will already have become the way you cook without you thinking about it, and the savings will have started to show up as real money you did not spend. Thanks so much for watching, and let me know in the comments below which of these 17 habits you have already been doing in your own kitchen without realizing they were Japanese. And go ahead and check out the video appearing on your screen right now for more Frugal Japan, and I will see you in the next one.